faith can feel like hearts and butterflies until someone lights a match and burns it all to the ground. Welcome to the Burning Butterflies podcast.
The sad thing is that there's abuse of every kind within the church. But the spiritual abuse is the stuff that just
What's a place there shouldn't be abuse? Like, there just shouldn't be abuse in a place that claims Jesus.
Well, it ruins your soul. If you're new here, we suggest listening to our prologue episode first. This is the story of two women's journey through spiritual abuse and escaping from toxic church culture while finding hope in Christ.
Sometimes it's just the facts, and if you get offended by it, that's a you issue. And if we can't be mature enough to have these conversations, even if some of the topics are difficult, then shame on us. Little disclaimer.
Yeah.
I do weird things. We've been podcasting for a while, but not using video. I'm very distracted by the video. I'm doing my best. So if you're watching and you're like, that lady's weird, I am. And I do strange things. So just...
We promise we'll get better.
It will.
Yeah, it'll get better. So for
and
those...
I can see myself. It doesn't help. Okay.
For those of you who are just joining us, I am Amanda.
I'm Melissa. Hello.
And we do have one other friend who will be joining us later on down the road. Her name is Brandy, so you might hear us mention her along the way. But like we talk about in the prologue episode, we are going through this chronologically. We've timelined this out, and so we just haven't got to the point where she even lives in the same state with us right now.
Right.
In the timeline.
But we also broke this into chapters.
Yes.
And so chapter 1 is what this little minisode is going to give you the background on what we're going to be talking about as we get into chapter 1.
So we're calling chapter 1 Before the Beginning because this is really kind of the origin stories of both of us, how we came to the church, what made us the perfect targets, and how we came to the point where we call it drinking the Kool-Aid. How did we fall for it? And how did we go all in? And we really want to highlight the fact that we've come out of this and we know that it was toxic, but this is really the euphoric time for us. This is the time where we thought we were a part of something amazing and different and special. And it really was a great time.
Yeah. And I think when we got to, if we're going to tell this story, that was probably the most important question was that we all had to answer for ourselves as we've healed. And our healing is, how was I so stupid? I think is the raw question.
Yeah.
You really get to a point of you're like, why did I do that? Yeah. So answering that question, like what was it that made me, and you have to go back. We're not going to bore you with long, lengthy details because it is a lot of years that we're going to cover, but there are some very key components to our upbringing and to different things like that answer the question of like, okay, before I walked in the doors of this church, who was I and what was it about who I was that made it so I didn't walk in and say, what is going on here? I have to leave,
Yeah. So this chapter will cover about 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of look at this as these were the good years. Even when it was really bad and we were towards the end of our time at this church, we still referred to this as the good years.
Yeah.
And we want to talk about why we were the perfect targets for manipulation. What were the red flags that we missed or just excused away? And what made the Kool-Aid that we drank taste so good?
Mm-hmm.
What made us stay for so long? Some other things that we're going to discuss in this chapter are mental health.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about mental health in the church, ADHD, and how the church handles those things. We're going to talk about marriage in the evangelical movement.
Yeah.
We're going to discuss pulpit shaming and pulpit mopping, which we will define when we get there.
That's not an official term. It's just what I call it. When pastors mop up situations from the pulpit. Because there's no other word for it.
And then we're going to really do a deep dive in the history of the church in America. And we're going to look at that from women's perspectives.
Yeah. And you're going to find that, we talked about in the prologue, we are going to do this chronologically. And we want to weave in so much of the bigger story into our story, but also using examples from our story of what was wrong with the situation. How do we do better? And so we are going to break it up. You're going to hear, Amanda's origin story as her origin story, and then we'll cut into, my origin story, and then we'll do some, either mental health or history or women's stuff or stuff. We'll cut into those, and marriage stuff. We'll talk about, also just different practices that you find in the church that when they become harmful, why it's a problem. Because there's so many things that I've learned about toxic, high control organization behavior that has blown my mind, that a lot of it just seems of how we modeled church in America. So I'm kind of like, well, are all churches cults? This is kind of the place that I've gotten to. So I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to figure out, where does these behaviors and these traits, there's things that we do that I think are okay. So when do they become a problem? At what level, or how much? Quantity versus quality versus what turns this seemingly harmless activity into a toxic, manipulative, hurtful event? So that's something that we're going to be answering along. And then eventually, in the end of chapter 1, we're going to get to a point where Amanda and I actually are at the church at the same time.
Our timelines are going to cross.
They merge.
Yes. So buckle up, because it's going to be a fun ride.
Burning Butterflies is a listener-supported podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing supporters on Patreon.
Follow the link in our show notes to learn how you can become a Patreon supporter too. Supporters get exclusive access to bonus content each month, including outtakes, cut content, and supporter-only episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on your listening platform.
Burning Butterflies is a production of Asha Media. Thank you for listening.